It's been an absolute pleasure thus far to hear, obviously, from Brent. What a great story. And our next speaker is a guy I've had the pleasure of working under since last August when I joined the Heat. It happened to be the first year for Troy Ward as the head coach of the Abbotsford Heat after a year as an assistant. I've learned an absolute ton, not only about hockey, but about life. And there's a few things that stand out in my time working with Troy over the past season. And again, I'm just a broadcaster. I'm not a guy that's in the locker room, and his players absolutely love him to death. Attention to detail would be one. The other, you can really tell he cares a lot about the people that he is coaching, that he works with. And number three, he's an immensely hard worker. He's at the rink at ungodly hours. It seems 8 days a week, if that was somehow possible. I'm just going to relay three quick stories of players and the success they had this year. We had one player, Akeem Alou, who was left out in the cold before Christmas. No one in the AHL wanted him. He left an East Coast League team. He's a Winnipeg product. They were done with him. We were real thin that time of year, and Troy and Calgary's management team brought in Akeem. And for a guy that nobody wanted, who came into the room with a sloppy suit and an afro, finished the year with the Calgary Flames, getting 3 points in the last two games of the regular season with the Saddledome chanting his name in Calgary. And he gives all credit to Troy. Another couple stories. Danny Taylor played in Germany last year, tried to return to the AHL, was cut from his PTO with the Springfield Falcons, has a wife, set to get married, or was married, I guess, one of the two, I can't recall. Didn't know if his hockey career was done, where he was going to play. He ended up posting some of the best numbers of his hockey career in Abbotsford under Troy. And the other is Chris Kalanos, a player that underwent microscopic hip surgery, didn't play a professional hockey game for 22 straight months, and he was among the top players in the AHL in points per game, set new franchise records in goals, points, and was named to the AHL All-Star game. All these players give Troy an immense amount of credit, and he happened to set a new franchise record for wins in a season despite the AHL season being shortened from 80 to 76 games. So head coach of the Abbotsford Heat, Troy Ward.
Thanks, Ryan. Is this all ready to go? Thanks, Ryan, and welcome everybody. Before I get started, there's a lot of little things I got to do here is learn how to use this whole presentation and go through everything with you, but kind of as the guy up here in front of you right now, like, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't certainly for the people that are going to help me through the presentation. So Nick's in the back. He's going to be a big part of this presentation. I appreciate his help, and Chad's up front in case my smartboard technologies go haywire here. As you all know, as coaches, when you start to coach and you start with new gigs and new little trinkets, like, it's nerve-wracking until you get really good at it, and once you get good at it, you're pretty comfortable. But we don't like to change as a group of people, so hang with me on the changes with the smartboard. I would echo what Brent said. Like, the one thing about these coaching clinics, having coached for a long time now, is like, when I first came to these things, like some of you, I wanted all these new drills. Like, I was just into drills. Like, I just wanted new drills, and I wanted to try and change who I was as a coach through a drill. As I've matured through the whole process, and as you've matured as people, you realize that it's not always the case anymore. There's so many new technologies for us as people. Like, we don't look at it the same way. But I would say what Brent said to you, if you can just learn one thing here this weekend, it's been an unbelievable experience for you. So, and I come for the same reason. Why do I come to speak? To give back, but most importantly, I come back to give this just so I can learn. That's how I'm going to learn today. So I certainly look forward to it and spending the hour with you. So that's who I am, and we've been through that. And the first thing I want to do is just give thanks to some people. The thanks I want to give is to Aaron, obviously. I want to give thanks to thecoachessite.com. I want to give thanks to you as coaches. My staff, like, I up here as I present, like, I really present on behalf of my staff. Like, I've been doing these for years, and I think it's special that you get a chance to say thank you to people. But mainly, you got to give the support to your staff. Like, I'm just a voice of, like, a lot of people up here. This isn't all about Troy Ward and Troy Ward does this. It's really about a lot of people I work with. But you know, I can draw on this gadget like here. So this guy right here, He's in the audience. So Cale, just give a wave there, stand up in the back so you know one of my assistants. He's here as a learner, just like you. But Cale's my defensive coordinator. I run things maybe slightly different. As Brent said, this is just me. But he's our defensive coordinator for the Abbotsford Heat. So whenever we don't have the puck, Cale's in charge. So if you want to talk defense through the weekend, you can pull Cale aside. Like, he's in charge of our team defensively. Jordan Sigalette, you're going to hear from his brother this weekend. He's our goalie coach. Luke Strand is our offensive coordinator. So whenever we have the puck in Abbotsford, he's in charge. And Mike Thompson's our strength and conditioning coach. A lot of former peers I've worked with. You'll see that in a minute. My parents, I got to give thanks to them today. My children, I have 2 boys, 21 and 17. I'd have to give thanks to those people for being here. My friends in the business, and then just the Calgary Flames for the opportunity that I have in front of me. So I feel very fortunate to be here, and I want to just say thank you to those people. Before I get going, I want to just set your mind. Like, I'm going to get up here today and I'm going to help you as a teacher. Like, I look at myself as a teacher / coach. I don't necessarily look at myself as a coach. I'm a teacher. And I have 2 degrees and they're both in education. So I've always considered myself a teacher before a coach. So when I speak to you today, like, the mindset I'd like you to go into the next 45 minutes with me is to just look at yourself as a teacher. How are you as a teacher? And I'm going to talk to you about your language, or the lack of language you have, or considerations that you would make changes in your ability to become a real effective teacher to your athletes. So if you looked at it just from the life perspective, and I gave you this, like, I set the tone is that change your words, change your world. So as you go through the process of becoming a good coach, and as you learn more, and a lot of you are very mature people, obviously, looking as I look out at you, you're well into your years. Change your words, change your world. Like, makes a big difference. And you're going to see that hopefully in the next hour a little bit for how it changed me. For instance, just to set the tone, like, I'm blind, please help. How many of you would give money to that person if you saw him on the sidewalk? Raise your hand if they said that. Quite a few of you, right? Okay. That's one guy sitting on the corner. That's what his sign says. And you're just the boys that raise their hand in here, and I think there's a lady in here, like, you raise your hand, said, I'd give money to help that person. What about that person? Big change. So as you become a coach and as you go through the process of developing yourself as a coach, like, your language is everything. Like, it has everything to do with how you coach your team. And it sets up how quickly your team will react to different situations. And as Brent spoke to the adversity you go through, even as a coach during adverse times during the game, your language is going to be critical in terms of what you're going to get out of your team the rest of the game. Okay, and we'll just examine that over the next little while here together. So that's the life side of it. As I come to you and as I stand in front of you, this isn't about me in terms of where I've been or anything about that. I just want to get your hands around who I am or how I got here. Like, there is no method to your madness. The only thing, because there's so many red boxes up there, obviously you know I'm really old. I'm 50 years old at this point in time. Like, to all those boxes, they all have different stops along the way. The only thing I can say to you is I once sat out there as a really young coach at the age of 24, and I played Division III hockey in the States. Like, I wasn't a very good hockey player. And I grew up in Minnesota, and I said to the guy that I was working for, he was my college coach, he says, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to coach in the NHL. And he started laughing, and he was like, are you serious? He goes, you sucked as a player. Like, you were a captain, but you weren't very good. Like, you had 32 points in 4 years. Like, you're going to go play college hockey or go coach in the NHL? I said, yeah, that's my goal. And so he said, well, let me give you one bit of advice. He said, my advice to you would be, his name was Wally. He said, old Waldo back in the day, he said, the mistake I made because of Sugar next to me, he said, she wouldn't let me move. But he said, if you have one thing I want you to do is you can leave every 3 years from where you're at, and you'll probably get to where you want to go. And I was like, what do you mean leave? He said, well, If you pick really good people to work for, and you're fortunate because of who you are as a man, and you work for good people, after 3 years and you've learned enough, like move on to somebody else. Either go to work yourself and be a head coach again, or go learn from somebody else. That'll help you out the most. So this path formulates that day in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, as to why I'm here where I am today. Like he said, every 3 years you got to get going. So every time I get a job now, the guy just goes, well, I'm going to give you a 3-year deal because you're going to leave anyway, so it doesn't matter. So that's about all I get, and then I just keep moving on. That's not the case anymore at 50, but there's some things that I think that stand out here a little bit that I'd just like to show to you right now, like I think are important. Like as you guys, and you can probably recognize this in the ladies that are involved, like there's different times. Obviously coaching in the NHL in Pittsburgh as a 35-year-old guy and coaching Yager and those type of players, that was a special thing. That's probably where I learned the most as a coach. Like I learned a tremendous amount. And it had to do with their language. When you got, like, we had 8 Czechs, and you got Barrasso, and you got Lemieux around, and Yager, and Kovalev, like, you're coaching the likes of those people. It's the language that changed me there a little bit, like for sure. I became a very educated man at the age of 35, 15 years ago as to how I would speak to players. And I learned a tremendous amount. So that was one stop along the way that I think you try and figure out where you're at. The other point is this one right here, I'll just draw the line, like that year I was actually Cale McLean's coach in Trenton, and we were fortunate enough to have an unbelievable season. It was the best year of my life as a coach. I, like a lot of you, was an assistant, and I was wondering, like, what would it be like to be a head coach in pro hockey? Whatever the level, how good could I be? Well, I went to Trenton. We had an unbelievable year. At the same time, this happened, the big D. I got divorced after that successful season. I left my wife and 2 children in Pittsburgh after coaching the Penguins, not to move them out of school, my kids, because they'd moved all the time. My son was going to go into his like 4th school, like already as a 3rd, 4th grade, 5th grade kid. Like that was impossible. So I left him there. At the end of the year, having been coach of the year in the East Coast Hockey League, I get divorced. And like you talk about changing your language, that'll change your language. That'll change everything about you as a man if you haven't been through that. So it was like getting a master's in coaching. Like for the first time, I learned that I have 2 ears and just 1 tongue. There were a lot of things that I felt like were stopping me from becoming a great coach. The one thing I did learn is that my language at home became part of my daily language at work. So everything kind of went together. Well, in the end of the day, I don't blame her for not loving me. Like it was a real eye-opening experience. So then I said to myself real quickly about my language, I was like, well then who wants to play for me? Like, and you have to realize when you all become coaches, you bring all your personal issues into your job. And if you think you can tell a player's issues, they can really tell yours. But when you get divorced, it kind of snapped into my head, like at this particular time in my development as a coach, like, wow, I got to make some changes in how I speak and how I think. So that ensued a lot of changes in the part that we're going to go through in a little bit. So then I get here and I try and save my marriage. I say, look, I'll get out of coaching. I'm going to go run the East Coast Hockey League and just discipline players and handle the referees. Like I'll never coach again a day in my life. Well, that didn't persuade her neither. It's too many years of the language and the things that I'd done. So I did that for a year, and then eventually I was fortunate enough to get back in the college game as an associate coach at the University of Wisconsin in 2002. Then you go through it again. You're never a coach until you're fired. Well, for the first time right here at the end of the Wisconsin era, I got fired by a good friend of mine. He's a really good friend, and he's an excellent coach. He was just like, you've outgrown this position. Like, it's hard to keep you. Like, every year people want to hire you. Like, I got to move on. We're a college program. I need some stability. And you're always on the go. There's my 3-year thing. Like, I got the itch. So I got fired from a good friend, and then I went into this part of it, the analysis part of it. So I went over across the country and talked about college hockey on television. At the end of the year doing college television, they were like, Troy, you're not very good at this because you don't want to rip any coaches. I was like, no, I don't want to rip any coaches. I guess you got the wrong guy, because they want you to be real critical about coaches. And I said, no, it's not my gig. Like, that's not how I'm wired. Like, coaches have choices. Who am I to sit up here and say you made the wrong choice? That's just how I see things. So I didn't do that anymore. And then I went to Victoria at the end of the year, which is just obviously across the water, and then another life-changing moment. You change again for a lot of reasons. I became a high school coach in New Prague, Minnesota, just so I could coach my son. My son was living in Pittsburgh. I was tired of being a single guy, like living without my kids, so I asked my ex-wife, will you give me my son, one of my 2 boys, if I coach high school hockey in Minnesota, where I grew up? Like, that's a big thing there. She said, yeah, I'll let him live with you. So I took a high school job. It lasted 2 months until Doug Risebrough called me with with the Minnesota Wild and said, will you go to Houston and be our assistant and our assistant GM down in Houston with Kevin Constein? I said, yeah, I'll take that on. And talked my ex-wife into letting my son go play AAA hockey in Houston, Texas. So those are the kind of the steps along the way that I got to be here today. And the reason why I share some of those stories with you about divorce and the different places in and out of hockey, I think that's a path that we all have. Like, I think we understand that. So that's my path and how I got here today. This next video, we're going to watch a video, and there was a lot made of just my language and how and this is going to kick off the rest of the last 40 minutes here, but this is just a video. I set it up to you just so, because you get a player's perspective, and then you get my perspective, obviously, in the playoffs. I look pretty tired on the screen here, but just to give you an idea where we're going.
My language, my language is just more about, in the hockey side of things, it's just more about abbreviations, and it's more about how to be the best teacher in a short amount of time. So in between periods, you have like basically 2.5 to 3 minutes, you can tell the team something, some type of message. Oftentimes it's just 1 to 3 points, that's it.
I don't think anyone speaks Troy's language, but no, we do our best, and he's definitely got all his little abbreviations, and that's the first thing we had to do when we came on board, was learn all those, because if players are asking us, we need to know, and need to know what they're all standing for, and there seems to be more as the year's gone on.
It took me a little while to get some of the language, but I could, there's maybe 1 or 2 things that still catch me off guard once in a while, but I've figured it out now, and it's interesting, but it works.
I don't speak it, but I understand it. He's been great for the group, especially helping the young guys, and I think he handles the older guys extremely well, just giving them their time to rest, as well as just knowing when to kind of push them and get the most out of them.
More understand it. I'm still not too up to his language yet, and still trying to put into my everyday language, but more of a listener than a talker of it.
No, you definitely understand it, and it's funny when we're hanging out, his language definitely creeps into yours too.
It gives us a really quick answer for a lot of things, and at the same time I believe it gets our players on board. At first it is a tricky thing, because players are, like you mentioned before, a creature of habit. How fired up they are to change isn't always accepted, but at the same time with success they can eat more and more of it.
We have the offensive side, which I think there's 4 components to offense, and the abbreviations, it's breakout, which is BO, so that'll go on the board, and then it's bonds, which is breakout neutral zone, which is just a quicker way to make it into bonds, and then line rush 4 is LRF, so that helps us on our attack, and then our IZO is our in zone offense, so that kind of takes you down the ice, and the learning part of their brain goes, okay, our breakouts, our bonds, our LRF, and our IZO. It kind of just moves you down the rink, and they understand there's 4 parts to our offense.
Well, he's got FONs, bonds, BTNs. He's got little abbreviations for everything.
At the start, I didn't know what was going on. I was so confused with everything, and it took a little time, but everything's quite clear now. Like I said, it took a while. A lot of different things, a lot of things I've never heard, and I never thought I'd ever hear. But once you get it dialed down and dialed in, and it clicks, it's just it's like learning how to shoot the puck.
On the other side, when we don't have the puck, which is really, that's when you're talking about your defense. Your forecheck is a defensive part of the game. FC is forecheck, and then we go through forecheck neutral zone, and that's basically our situation in the middle of the ice. And our LRA is how we handle the other team's attack, and then we eventually fall back into defensive zone coverage, or DZC. So that's our defensive zone coverage. So there's 4 going up this way, and there's 4 going back this way.
I always, as a D-man, it's DAP, which means defense at post. It's kind of a defensive strategy, which, you know, when I first came in, I saw DAP on the board. I had no idea what he was talking about.
We're going to start on the Fonz, and then we're going to be right into an FN's forecheck neutral zone, and it's going to end up in an LRA, and we'll be in DZC before you know it. And that's all going to take 6 seconds. So you better understand Fonz, you better understand forecheck neutral zone, you better understand LRA, and then you better understand DZC, or your shift will be over and you'll be -1.
Okay, so that's a little bit about where we're going to go here, and the language of hockey that I'm going to get into, we're going to go through real quick, and hopefully I'll give you some time at the end. But the tough part about presenting a lot of times in PowerPoint is you put these up there and you want to read ahead, and I want you to read ahead, and these are like things that I would ask you as a coach. How many of you are in here today as a staff? Like there's 2 of you together, like, or are you just all separate? All right, so let's say I'm speaking to you as a staff. And regardless of your level, whether you're at Hockey 1 or whatever you are in the local area, wherever you're from, no matter what your age level you're coaching. Like if you sat down with your assistant at some point today and you said, are these hockey-related terms that we would use? And you just start listing them. Like if your kids went to school, so to speak, would they understand your language? Or if some of you in your 40s in here, as I see you, are you just going to get up and start talking like your normal 40-day language and then coach like Pee-wee type kids during the day or whatever they might be? And then they're supposed to decipher what you're talking about, especially in a split-second situation. Like you have to define your language. So for these terminologies here, are these hockey-related terms? To you guys, they might not mean anything. To the 2 players you just saw, or 3 players on there, when they get to our team, like that means nothing. This stuff means nothing to them until it takes time. But I believe at my level, and to be really quick and effective as a professional coach, like I don't have a lot of time. And they don't want to have a lot of time for me. Like it's their game. They understand that. So if we get in there and Coach McLean, who's in the back of the room, talks about defense, and he gets up on the board there and he writes DAP, defense at post. Like if you don't know how to play around your post in today's game and you don't have a strategy, like you're in trouble. So we don't get in there and write like defense at post on the whiteboard in between periods, nor some of you don't even have you don't get the ice even probably remade in between. You have 10 or 2 minutes at the board, like right at your bench. Like you're faced with those situations. So as a coach developing, like you have to come up with some type of language that's going to get them right away to where you want them to be, and then they understand it. The repetition that you give as a coach will end up making the difference in what you do. So DAP up there is a very common word. BTN goes right next to it. That's behind the net. Like if we're yelling BTN, like, and we put on the whiteboard, our players will know what BTN means like right away. Like it just registers, and then it sends the signals as to how we set up our system as to what we're talking about. So the language that we create within our room, at least in Abbotsford, for me as the head coach, really determines the retention and the speed at which they can uptake the information. You don't have a lot of time as a coach. Okay, so these are all words that I would say that represent a little bit of the Abbotsford Heat staff. But what represents you as a coach? What would you say? And how many language words do you actually use in front of your team? And then how many of them that really retain them all? You have students and players on your team that obviously are learning disability in today. So are you compensating for that, or do you even know they are? And then how do you get that information to their head? So that's real quick there, and you'll get this eventually later. But that's kind of going to help you. Now, this part here goes into, really, it was ironic when you walked in as a group of coaches today. You saw John Wooden up here talking on the video screen, and he was talking. Like, to me, he's one of my greatest mentors. Like, I've studied this guy religiously. And so he was a big, obviously, pyramid guy. And as a coach along the way, somewhere along the way, and you've probably seen them maybe through other coaches that are presented, but it's in pyramid form. So as a coach, to help simplify like our language, like one of the things that I want you to understand is that this is where we go right away as a team. But just before I get into that, I just wrote some notes. Like, remember, I already said this, but when you start coaching, your own personal issues come out. So before you determine how you're going to coach your team, like, you have to remember your strengths and weaknesses. Meaning if I'm an insecure person, my team is probably going to be insecure. Like, so you got to factor all these factors in about who you are. A lot of times we pick up the fact that we just want to coach and blow the whistle, and we like the thrill of getting out there and running a practice. But on the moments of truth, as I call them, when you're up there and you're in front of your team and some of your personal issues come out, like, good luck. Like, so if you want your team to be well-balanced, you better be the most well-balanced person on the team in a lot of ways. So I say that to you, and otherwise they're going to mirror it. Good coaching becomes a way of life. Like, it becomes a way of life before we just get into this. Like, it's not about the way you treat your team. It's about how you treat everything else in life. And I say this all the time to our players. Like, it's not about how I treat my team. It's really about how I am with my girlfriend who's in the hotel. It's really about how I am with strangers like yourself this weekend, if I have time for you and I'm a good person. It's really about all the decisions I make. It's whether I give people opportunities for free will versus some reason to the Akeem Alou story. Like, I didn't care what Akeem Alou's baggage was. I didn't care one bit what his baggage was. It was just giving him a chance. He was an athlete sitting in front of me that asked for a chance. That's my job to give him the chance, but I have to be open-minded about it. If I bring issues into there and I don't like to treat people that I don't know very well, or I'm not a very open guy, and I bring all these people issues I have every day as I live my life, like, it's tough to be a good coach. So the thing I want you to think about is just those things. And then do you discipline and discourage, or do you discipline and encourage? Like, there's a difference there. There's a big difference. So as you think about your discipline, do you discourage or do you encourage? Like, so these are things about who you are as you sit in front of me as coaches. These are things you got to figure out about yourself to help your team. I could be the first one, and there'll be a lot of great presenters up here to tell you, like, you should do this and try this system and all that. Like, I'm into all that, but if you ask all the veterans in the room that have coached for a really long time, systems are systems. It's who you are. And I believe you're very fortunate to hear Brent talk, because there are a lot of coaches at my level that would like to be like Barry Trotz or like to have that type of tenure. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot. We're very envious of that, and that's an unbelievable thing for that staff. But if you looked at that staff and you just looked at this coaching thing I'm talking about, I think it's who they are as people. It has nothing to do with their systems. They adapt as well as anybody, but they're unbelievable people. So you have to examine who you are this weekend a little bit and figure that out, and then what are you bringing in front of your team. So the pyramid part here, this first one that I want you to just look at with me, is just like kind of how I set it up. Like, this is how I go back to the team every day, or every time we have a game, or if we had a game, or we're about to have a game. So if you go to here and I go in red, the Calder Cup, like, that's what we're after. That's a byproduct, or winning is a byproduct of all the things below there. So I don't have to come up with some new formula every day I'm in front of my team asking them to do something really quick. Like, I'll take them right to this all the time, and I'll just summarize why we win and why we lose. This is our formula for success. But the thing is that even if John Wooden was sitting here in front of you today, it would be a huge pleasure for all of us. If he was sitting here, the one thing pyramids do is they lock you in. Like, you got to be a dynamic coach when you have pyramids, because once they're up there, after a while, you have to probably say them in 10 to 15 different ways to make your points during the year. Otherwise, this becomes mundane to the athlete. They're just like, oh, here he goes with the pyramid again. But you got to keep changing the way you make your points. So when we talk about forming good habits, like, this is a life issue. That's life and game. Like, and I consider myself more of a life coach to you standing in front of you than I would call myself a hockey coach. Like, I like to talk about life, like, with the players constantly. So this is life and game. Obviously, these two here are pretty simplistic, like what they are. But we keep everything under those two categories. And in our system in Abbotsford, which I'm not going to get into, like, we have all kinds of, there's a long list of things that we would tell the players they'd have to know the first day of training camp in these areas. They're not just words. There's a lot of meaning behind it, and the players understand that. So that's what that is, and that allows us to go to that as a team all the time. Win, lose, or draw, we go back to this. Because I truly believe, like, if we have good habits or fundamentals, if we play hard and we play smart, even in the NHL today, if you play hard and smart, you're probably at about a 75% clip you're going to win. You're going to win if you play hard and smart. But as you coach, you know to do both all the time. That's your trick. That's your stick. Like, you got to figure that out. That's hard to do because of the athletes we have today. And the team concept is a team concept. So that pyramid is just a pyramid that that we lay out for our team in Abbotsford on the team side of it. Okay, so it's kind of our foundation of how we go and then how we work off of that. The next slide here is really, and you're going to be able to get this in a handout form by the end of the weekend. This is for developing an individual, which would be situated for a lot of you in the room. Okay, the number one criteria that's kind of taken over in the hockey world, at least at the pro side, is just it's just this word right here. It's called hockey sense. This doesn't always print that well up here. Okay, so hockey sense, that's kind of dominating right now. And if you go back to building the foundation of a really good player as a teacher out in front of me right now, you've got to deal with the mind. Like, that sets up every part of the player. Whether you want to say that's mental toughness or hockey sense, you can throw a lot of different terms in there. You'll get this again later in a different form in more detail as you take your notes. But that's the foundation of any player you're developing, regardless of the age you're coaching. It is the number one thing you have to. So now if you tie that in with language that we're talking about today, like, that's going to determine. How many of you are parents and have kids in school? Raise your hand. Myself included. Could you just imagine maybe somebody you know that coaches, or only even yourself, ask yourself the question, what would it be like if my own son had to take math from me as a teacher? Like, what's your language like? Could you teach math? Or would your kids be really in trouble because you just show up and put a whistle on and expect yourself to be a great coach? So what is your language? So the mind and the development of your own children getting really good grades determines the language and the repetition of that teacher every day. Teachers go through it with lesson plans religiously. Like, so to make a difference in somebody's life after you leave this clinic this weekend, like, your language has to become the paramount of who you are. And a lot of you will say, I have a language. But then a lot of you will examine a little further and say, I need to work and refine some things as to how I talk. The mind, or the body, goes next in line. And then interestingly enough, in the big picture, skills is third. Like, but maybe as a youth coach, you think, well, I got to really develop the skills. Well, are you going for the results as a coach, or are you dealing with the process based on your age? Like, there's going to be people in your organization that are going to be coaching the highest level within your organization that say, we'd like you to be a little bit more process-driven. Like, give them everything that you want in the mind and help them develop, but we'll take care of the results later. Like, the results don't really matter at this much, but you're so forced on it's who you are and it's your personality. Like, I need to win this game, so you'll do anything it takes to just get that win. But there are other people that are asking you in your organization, just deal with the process. I fortunately work for a company like that. Some days, like Wise Broad or Feaster will say, you know, it's time to start to win. And then there are times when you have really good general managers, like, it's not time to win. As he spoke to adversity in the back, like in the American Hockey League, this is a time you're going to actually suck. So just let your team suck. Don't worry about it. I don't think you're a bad coach. Do you know how nice it is to work for somebody that has that mindset? Like, they knew we sucked in February. Like, and I was kind of like, we're terrible. And they're like, I know, you're worse than terrible. Like, you guys are really bad right now. But we got 9 players in Calgary. What do you want to do? Like, in the coast players you're pulling up aren't going to make the difference. So just go through adversity, as Brent spoke to it, and that's what you learn as you work with good people. But the skills becomes the third part of really you developing a player. Tactics we'll get into a little bit more, system, strategy, and games. Again, games is a byproduct of everything underneath. Okay, so that's an individual pyramid that we use in Abbotsford all the time. And when players come in for meetings, we go through this pyramid all the time with them to try and tell them where they're really doing really well and where they're really behind their development to be a National Hockey League player. And you'll find that the mind part is usually a part that we spend the most time on. Their skills, their body, things like that are well intact. They've demonstrated that through their draft status, but what's out of whack is usually the mind. So that's a way we refer to their development, and that's part of our language, okay? This you'll get a little bit later in a handout, but that just explains what everything is. Okay, but as I've traveled the countries, you know, here in the U.S. and putting on coaching clinics, not a lot of coaches are real dynamic right here. Like, that's a little bit of misknown. Like, that's ability to read numbers and colors. And the game is a math game. You are coaching a math game, period. It's a numbers and colors game. And so you have to be able to read at the fastest level of the game that's played at, depending on your level, and your kids have to know tactics, and they have to know how to handle those situations, because it's constant groups of numbers and colors. Is it a one-on-one? Is it a two-on-one? These are the things that will make you special as a coach. So that's just a little bit more an explanation, and we'll go quickly through that. Now, I'm now going to do two things to you. Real quickly, we're going to get through this, not spend a ton of time on this. Mind area terms. So if you go to the pyramid and you're a staff in here and you say, okay, what are we going to do this year in terms of developing the mind of our athlete? Like, what do we really want to do? Well, determine your language. Determine your language as a staff or as a head coach. And then I put in the 6 points next to you over there. That's for you to fill in when you get the package later in the week, the handout, the weekend. Like, you write in your words. Use it as a worksheet. You say these are the words we'd use. We have to use these words all the time, depending on the age level you're coaching. These are just words that we use. So we use like all the time. We talk about internal and external fuel. Like, we talk about this all the time at the professional level. Like, is this a guy that has got external fuel or he needs internal fuel? Like, who is it? We got to figure that out. So that's a part of the mind right there that we talk about all the time. And these are things that we naturally just do all the time within the pyramid. So that's the first one you'll get in there. The next level is just going up the pyramid. It's just going to body. Okay, so the body area terms, depending again on the level. At our level, we talk about core all the time. We talk about anterior chain and posterior chain. And that just explains, like, that's us in a nutshell. We're the American Hockey League. We're trying to make the National Hockey League type player. Like, we got to worry about their front side and their back side. It's that detailed. It isn't much more than that. But at your particular level, you might not use any of these body language terms. You might just come up with your own thing. Like, we're so much in the skill development, we're going to work in them really understand their legs, like in the muscles that you're using in their legs, or in shooting, like how they rotate their trunk. Like, as important as you think that it isn't, it is really important to the athlete, because they're really smart kids today. They're very smart. But the more you can give them about what they're trying to do and become better skaters in terms of the language you use, and the more repetition you use it, the better I think you're going to become at being a teacher. Skill area, I'm just going to work through these. These will again be in the thing, like, but edges, stops, starts, pivots, stride, recovery. Like, if I was a really young coach, like I might only have 3 points. Like, that's your staff right there. Like, these are the only terms we're going to use all year. But when we refer to it at game speed, like, you're the defensive coach and all of a sudden you're talking about pivots or whatever it may be with your group of defensemen, like, you have to make sure that your language is repetitive enough where they start to understand this. And it's not different from game to practice. Like, it's always the same. But you've determined what your language is. Okay, so that's where we're going with that in these points here. Same with the puck handling. Like, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with these. I'm actually just going to try and generate your brain to, like, function on its own after the clinic, to go home and say, okay, what terms do we use? What is our language? Do we get this detailed? Or is Troy just a little off his rocker? Like, it's still hockey. Like, we don't have to get into this. And you may not have to get into this, but it just depends on the level. And I always refer to myself as, I have a 21 and a 17-year-old. The 17 still lives in Pittsburgh with my ex-wife. She's still there, and he's still there. But he's going to school, and somebody's teaching this kid, like, so that he can get into a college. Like, and you're teaching somebody that has dreams to become a pro hockey player, or to play college hockey, or just play in the BCJHL, whatever it may be. You're going to make a difference. So I happen to think that being a good coach and a teacher is spending time on these terms and then defining the terms so that they have the best chance to get where they'd like to go. So these are things right here, like when you talk about skill area terms and puck handling, you know, at our level, like, we get into this all the time, like this vision point right here. Like, when we get into vision down here at 5:30 and 6:30, it's just your terminology and your language. So if you were in Detroit and you had Datsuk, like, that guy sees 6 o'clock. Like, he sees 6 o'clock. He's one of the few that can see 6 o'clock. But what we try to do with all our athletes at the American League level is make sure that they can see 5:30 and 6:30. So as a teacher, the descriptive words that you use in your language makes a big difference. I say to some D, I got D that can see 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock. And then they ask me why they don't play late in the game. I was like, your vision sucks. Like, you just can't make the play. Like, you can't see hardly to your left or right. Like, what do you want me to say to you? And so That doesn't mean that I don't think they're good players. It's just that they don't play at certain times. They can't see things quick enough for them to make a difference. Well, if I just keep saying the same old terminology like, you just can't see anything, well, what does that mean? How descriptive is that? Is that where you're at as a teacher? Like, that's what I'm asking you. If you said, okay, I'm going to refer to the clock, like I want my kids at this particular age in Burnaby, BC, to be able to do left and right, okay, gotcha. Then you're in pretty good shape. So it's just changing your language. So that's what that means there. And I'll just keep going through this. Passing and stick handling are going to go, same thing. You're going to get up and down at your age level. This will eventually give it again to you today. Shooting accuracy, I do the same thing. Okay, and then this is where I talked about in the video. Like when I grew up as a coach in Minnesota, I was taught that the red line determines whether I was on offense or defense. Boy, that was really off. That wasn't it at all. Like there's 4 components to your offense, and so you work your way up the ice with breakouts, bonds, LRF, and IZO. The offensive coordinator, which you saw, which was Luke Strand, he's also in charge of our power play. I don't write the word power play out. I just write the numerical number it is. Like if we're going to talk 5-4, I put 5-4 up. Like it's just quick. It's simple. That's how they know what we're talking about. So that's the offensive side. The defensive side, like when you come into our room, this is what's up all the time. This is just, it's the abbreviations, we just don't go into that. And Kale in the back of the room is in charge of the penalty kill, so that's the defensive areas. Now, if we got into our language and how we get back our language to our players, then you get into a whole massive group of stuff. But I'm at my level, so what I'm giving you is my level. That doesn't mean that you should do this. But when you do the video note presentation in front of our team, like if I go through a video notes and I've marked in my video notes, which takes 5.5 hours roughly to get through a game in detail, 5 hours, like if you go through and I chart BOTs, that's breakout turnovers right there, BOT. Like if I chart a whole bunch of those, I know we didn't get out of our end. And if I go down to the other end of the rink and I look at my notes as I printed them out in numerical order, and I have a bunch of FCMs, that's forecheck mistakes, I know why we had issues. Like we did nothing on our forecheck, and all we did is turn over the puck on the breakout. Like I can tell how many times I make comments in those 2 areas as to where our team is at, like in a heartbeat. Like it snaps up on the video right now. So that's what I'm talking about, just your language. Again, that's at a higher level. And now we're just going to go up and down the rink. I do believe this. As you learn to become an effective teacher, in between periods and that, you have to take your players up and down the rink, just like a book. So when you talk about things in between periods or you present certain things, I always start with breakouts and I work our way down the ice to IZO. Like I think that's critical because that's how we want the puck to go. We understand that we're going to lose it and there's going to be some defensive parts to that, but we take them up the rink and then we take them back down the rink all the time. In video, whenever I show video in front of a team, it's up the rink and it's down the rink. It's the same all the time. So they begin to play the game the fastest way they can. They always program it in the right direction. A lot of you will speak to your team and you'll just go all over the map. You're going to talk about your forecheck, then you're going to talk about something else, and then the athlete, like by the time you're into something else, is 2 systems behind you. They have a chance if you put it in order. They have a chance to stay with you. So that's you just helping you as like how we do things. Real quick, I got about 10 minutes left here before I got to answer questions. Whiteboard notes. So at our level, like we obviously have huge whiteboards or smart boards, but the whiteboard notes differ from our pregame speech most of the time. So what's an example of a whiteboard note? I'll get to in a second. But the whiteboard is prepared 2 hours prior to arrival. So when you talk about your language, you're at the rink, you've got maybe Burnaby 8 rinks right down the road, not that far, and you got to go in there and before the game you want to make your points. But instead of getting up there all the time, find a way to put them on a whiteboard or rink diagram board as they walk in so they can learn it. Once they know your language, like you don't have to say as much. Like you can get there an hour before the kids do and just put up a couple of notes. They come in, they read it, they start to sink in, so then when you go to speak to it, it's already in. Like, but you don't have to fill. You know, you got those little white rink diagram boards and there's no room. But if you can concisely get your language down to abbreviations and what you need and they understand it, like you can make. Then when you come in to speak, like it really rolls quickly, even with youth kids. So we prepared a couple hours before, and the message can be delivered in many different ways. That's up to you as a coach. Like you're all intelligent people out here. So that's the whiteboard. Now this is a pregame in Abbotsford. Like that's tough to see. You'll see it better in a printout. But what we do is we have the Abbotsford Heat side over here. Okay, so that's our side, and we talk about our offense and our breakouts and what we want to do. We talk about our defense, and then we talk about what San Antonio does. But you can see that this is red and blue and black. Like the color of the pen always matches the team's color of the jersey. Like to be an effective teacher, you don't get up there and write everything in black. Like that doesn't make sense to me. I have an iPad. Do you know what's on my iPad, dads? Like, and now you're going to write everything in black and I get to decipher what the heck you're talking about? Like we're playing a green team, then put it in green pen. If you're going to be an effective teacher in a quick, clean environment. So we put everything in the colors that we want it to be in. That doesn't mean you have to, but it's certainly more effective. In between periods, you already heard me talk on this real quick. I just got to get through this. This is a player's time. At my level, the things I'm putting up here, it's a player's time. It's not my time. I got to give them their rest, so I give them their rest. Like I don't usually speak. Kale or Luke does. Because I don't want to wear out my thing. But reminders we talk about, changes if we make any. Our language abbreviations would be the first thing that Kale would put up on the board, and we might have 3 to 4 minutes depending on our message. And that's with 18 minutes in between periods. So we only look at ourselves as a 3 to 4 minute teacher in between periods. We don't want to overconsume. Our job is to coach during the week, not during the game. If you're coaching during the game, it's a bit late in my opinion. Like you can make subtle adjustments, but if you're really trying to give them all your ammo in one day on a Saturday morning, that's tough. They just went through a week of school, everything else, and now you're trying to make them understand that in a quick, short time. So we look at it like that. Post-game, all I can tell you real quick is the comments that we make at our level is I would only ever speak to the team with regards to travel at the American League level. I never, ever, ever address the team after a game, ever. I just found it's the most harmful time you can speak. My personality and all my issues will come out. That's not my time. I park everything and we don't say anything. It's only about just travel and detail. So we don't get into a lot of those things in between periods. I realize that if you're a youth coach, you're saying, well, Troy, I'm not going to see him till Tuesday and I got to give him some thoughts. Well, the only thing I'd always urge you to do, like our parents always urge us to do, is huddle with your assistant coaches. Try and get your calm down yourself a little bit, and then make sure that you can speak clearly and concisely in a positive way. Like that's probably the most important thing you can do at that particular time. I'm just going to try and catch up here 1 sec. And I've always referred to the post game like just go back when you were young. Like if you had the last 10 minutes of your date, one of your first dates. How critical is that to get the second date? Pretty critical time. Okay, so you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're reeling back the next day. The only other thing, how much time do I have left? 5 minutes? The thing that I want to just get through to you a little bit more about the language is just the process, and the process versus the result. And I know some of you, as I click these up here just to get to a point where we're done, like the result of the game, the result of the shot clock, the result of the scoring chance. Probably not, you'll probably see me a short time in this area, probably based on what I tell you, is that I'll probably be fired. But I really, to be honest with you, came to Abbotsford, like I care about winning as much as you, and I'm as competitive as all of you in the room, but I get paid to win and lose to a certain level, but I could really give two hoots whether I win or whether I lose. And I've always said that, and I'll always say that. I just don't care. I care about the process. That's all I care about. Because to the impact of what Andrew Ferentz said, and I coached Andrew in Pittsburgh, to what he said about Brent, that is the only reason why you coach. If you're not there yet, you'll get there someday. You'll get there. So in order for me to care about the result all the time, I don't give two hoots. The result should take care of it based on me as a teacher, based on my language and based on how I run my team. That should just take care of itself. But if all I care about is the shot clock and what you may think of, oh, Abbotsford got killed last night in the shots, I don't care. Like I go home every day just like you. I want to go home 1-0. That's my goal. But in the end of the day, like I know it's about part of the process, so I don't coach the results and I don't worry about it. And then during this whole thing, what you do with the pyramid is you always go back to the pyramid for direction. So it's simple for me. You just go back to our pyramid, whatever pyramid you want to develop, and you don't have to develop a pyramid, whatever your direction may be. On the skill part of it, this is just one thing we'll leave you with right here is the skill development. You all have to do that as a group of coaches in here. That's really obviously very critical. The part whole part is one thing that I've found through time, like how do you coach your drills? Drills have to be in part, then whole, and then back to part to be really effective. So let's just say you do a 3-on-2 drill. You might have to break that down into part, then put the whole together for your team, and then go back to a different part for this thing to sink in. If you went to become a teacher in the educational institutions, they would teach you part whole part method of teaching. If you're young and you haven't coached a lot, I urge you to figure out what part whole part is, because it'll make most sense to your athletes. They'll get the quickest retention and they'll be a better team because of it. The other thing you're going to chase is just one puck drills, and I'll talk to any one of you about this while we're here. But one puck drills simulate the game the most. They simulate the game the most. If you just do shooting drills and 1-on-1s and 2-on-1s and you have multiple pucks all over and I have a choice to go get a certain puck during a practice, like it's tough to simulate the game and it's tough for your kids to play in the game. One of the biggest compliments I think you can get is your players will say our practices are harder than our games. Then the results just take care of itself. But you got to get to one puck drills. It's really, really critical, and it's part of our language up in Abbotsford. I've already talked about numbers and colors. Interestingly enough, as a bunch of pro coaches in the room, in pros, our socks match our jerseys. We have the same issues you have. We have guys that can't see above the kneecaps while they're stick handling. We get the same issues. They're just 6'4" and 230 pounds, but they don't have great vision. But the sock matches the jersey, so they don't look that stupid. Like, so they can figure it out. Like, when you're coaching youth hockey and your socks don't match your jersey and you're like, Johnny, why'd you pass to the other team? Well, hell, he's got orange socks on. I didn't even see his jersey. Like, I don't know. But it makes sense. So as a youth coach, your numbers and colors determine your success. If the socks can match a jersey, like that's the way they play the game. That's the way they think. They're in a very visual world. So that's what we mean by numbers and colors, and then just the repetition that we go forward with. So that's it in a nutshell. I mean, how many do I have? A minute for questions?
We've got 10 minutes for questions. I just want to make sure we have some time again.
The other part of this that I give you in the presentation, it's just going to take you through skill development. I'm not going to get into these. I probably did more than I wanted to, but I just put up here what these all broke down to. So you're eventually going to get these in the presentation. And the one puck drills to me is like really your cat's meow in terms of drills this weekend. If you can get to a point where you have one puck drills, even if you have half ice or you have quarter ice, but you understand the one puck drill concept, like you're going to do the best job you can for your athletes. So at this point, before I conclude, I'll just answer any questions.
All right, I've got the mic back here, so if you've got a question for Troy, you can raise your hand and I'll come find you. I've got one to get us started, Troy. You coached Jaromir Jagr. We heard some good Jaromir Jagr stories from Kevin Constantine last year. I wonder if you have any from him or any other guys that stand out. Something might.
Jarmir's back in the league. I can't say much. Like, this would probably be tweeted. Social network. Jaromir can't skate backwards, by the way. I don't think Kevin probably told you that because Kevin wasn't smart enough to figure that out himself. And I mean that in a good way, but like Jaromir can't skate backwards. He cannot skate a lick backwards. Like, just watch him this year. He's not going backwards. Like, I don't care how good Glenn Gully is in Texas. Like, he's not going backwards. So that's a known fact. Like, as Jarmir's an unbelievable. He was an unbelievable teacher to me. I spent 45 minutes a day on the ice with Jaromir after practice. Him and Kovalev. You talk about a real treat. That's a real treat. Like, I can't even begin to tell you how much I learned and their attention to details. Brent was talking about Korea before. Like, Karina and Slani were in Anaheim, and Jaromir would say, Troy, Korea and Slani are creeping up on me in the scoring race. I'd be like, yeah, they're getting close. He goes, I got to stop going to Vegas. Like, I'm getting tired. And I was like, oh, that's good. You better stop because they're like not that far behind. He goes, you watch. Me no go to Vegas, me blow them away in the next 10 days. Look at our schedule. Game, rest. He goes, I'll get 20 points in the next 2 weeks. Sure enough, he'd get 20 points. He'd have like an 18-foot cushion again. Then he'd be like, oh, see, I tell you, Troy. And then we were at the old Igloo in Pittsburgh, and he would come in down in the room, and Yarmer always, we'd land like from New Jersey, and then he'd walk across the tarmac, get on a private jet, and away he'd go to Vegas or Atlantic City, like all the time. Like all his cronies, the Czech kids, they would all go to Vegas. Because we had the next day off, and then a practice day, and then a game, so he would take off again. And then we started the second half of the year, and he came down, and he would always stop because I was the go-between Kevin and Yarmer. And he would come in, and he would knock, and he would go, Troy. I'm like, yeah, what's up, Yarmer? You tell Kevin to, pardon my French, you tell him to shut the fuck up tonight. I'm like, all right, what do you want me to say? And he's like, tell him to shut the fuck up. As soon as the redhead starts chewing gum really hard and yelling, we all fucking panic. Like, tell him to shut up. He goes, I feel great. I'm rested. I get 5 points. We win 5-2. I said, oh, so Tommy's going to let in 2? He goes, Tommy always lets in 2 when it's 5-2. And I was like, all right. So we go through a tough stretch again. Yarmer would go to Vegas, knock on the door. He said, what's up, Yarmer? He's like, you tell that redhead he coached his ass off tonight. I'm fucking tired. So those are a few stories of Yarmer.
The trick's going to be finding another coach next year that's Coach Yarmer. He continues to be the side story of these conferences. Any questions? Raise your hand for Troy. All right. Perhaps not. You scared him with your BOTs at LMNOPs or what?
The only thing I would say, just before I go, the one thing I do want to say to you that somebody gave me, it was one of the best tips I ever got as a coach was, and I wanted to share this with you before I left, is I teach, you coach. And it took a long time for me to figure that out. And I say that to you from the bottom of my heart. Like, I taught some things today, Brent taught some things today, now you coach. And the meaning behind that is, as a coach, is this: when you get in front of your players, if you have to teach and coach, like constantly, meaning you have to put arms and legs on everything on a daily basis, it's going to be a long year. Like, once you teach one time, whether you use language, whatever your mode of operation is, once you teach one time, they should understand it. But if you have to constantly coach them and teach them and put arms and legs on everything for your players all the time, that means you got to be a more thorough teacher. It's going to make your job long and sometimes hard. And I've learned that through all my experiences. One of the great tips I always got was I always considered myself, tried to be a great teacher, but once you have that thought process, like I teach and you coach, even like your own kids, like tell them to take out the trash and they take it out. They understand that. You don't ever have to teach them again. They just do it on their own. They coach themselves through it. You're going to be a special teacher and you'll have a great time coaching athletes. So I wish you all the best and I appreciate your time. Thanks.